Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Wednesday, March 11th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris, and Jed Lowry here with you on this episode. We discuss Italy's shocking win over Team USA in Tuesday's World Baseball Classic action. We will try to untangle the scenarios that will lead to the elimination or the advancement of Team USA to the quarterfinals, which will now just be in the hands of Team Italy and Mexico as they meet on Wednesday night. Get that Tubi app downloaded ASAP. We're going to dig into the injury for Hunter Greene. He is going to miss probably half of this season following surgery to remove bone fragments. We're also going to dig into the extension that Jesús Luzardo signed with the Phillies. Tons of ground to cover here. I did not expect the outcome or the sequence of events that led to the outcome Tuesday night, Jed. I mean, Team Italy has a quality roster. Team USA didn't know the situation. And there's a now deleted clip of Mark DeRosa on MLB Network Tuesday morning saying that they had advanced to the quarterfinals already. So a lot of questions to be asked here. We could begin in a lot of different places. Maybe we could just begin by saying, hey, nice work by the Italian team, just coming in and playing a good game and winning. I mean, they got 4 2/3 scoreless from Michael Lorenzen, which that's a heck of a story for a guy that I think, to be quite honest, is in that later stages of his big league career, maybe last chance saloon as a starter after signing with the Rockies this winter. So for him to go on that stage and have a moment like that, hey, great baseball moment at the very least.
Certainly. Great pitching by Michael Lorenzen. He still looked like he had some gas in the tank. He wasn't, he wasn't just up there. He's always been that high effort guy. You can hear him grunting on the mound. And the velocity is there still. I mean, he was up to 95, 96 is what I saw. And so, yeah, that's a quality start. They got some great, relief innings. And you could tell like there was a little bit of, I think the realization that this game actually mattered, happened maybe in the 5th inning, and it was like, oh crap, we better put up some runs.
I think, realizing that run differentials, runs allowed, runs scored, all those things become factors at different levels of the tiebreaker. And I think the real light bulb moment was that we saw Clayton Kershaw warming up in the bullpen at one point, and then he didn't enter the game, and we saw Mason Miller warm up and enter the game. I think that was when sometime between those two things happening, the communication got into the dugout that, hey, this matters. We're going to have to play this a little differently than you're trying to play it. A lot of folks out there today calling for Mark DeRosa's job, not only as manager of Team USA, but saying he has no credibility anymore and shouldn't even be on the morning show at MLB Network after this tournament ends.
That's a little bit rich for me, but I do think that maybe the two jobs kind of got into a problem with each other, because, I mean, he was on TV very recently, and did he know all the rules exactly right? Did he understand exactly how? Because I will say that I don't understand all of the rules. When it comes to how the tiebreaker goes tonight, and we'll get into that in a second, I don't think that I understand all the rules. So I had the similar feeling as him that they were just already through, and I was wrong, and he was wrong. And at some point they must have realized that. But I don't believe that this is something where, he just misspoke and he knew all along, because at the same time that he said that our tickets punched through to the next round, he was also talking about how people enjoyed themselves after the game last night and late into the night, and they were dragging today. So he allowed that understanding that they were through to the next round to pervade to the rest of the team. Like, it wasn't just oops, like I said it wrong. I don't believe that. I think that everyone thought they were through, and there was a little bit of a rude awakening. Maybe during the game. Maybe you're right. Maybe there was like a wait, what does this rule book say right here?
They got the espresso machine from Italy halfway through the game.
Yeah, someone rushed some espresso cups over. I mean, they did score 6, which ends up being pretty important and helps them in this when it comes to those the tiebreak rules tonight.
Yeah, so as we've seen broken down now in greater detail, it's pretty simple. Italy 3-0 so far. They play Mexico. Mexico's 2-1. The U.S. is 3-1. So the U.S. has already played its 4 games. 7 o'clock Eastern is the first pitch. What you're looking for, depending on what you're rooting for, I guess this could go a few different ways. If Italy wins, Italy is the top seed. They'll be 4-0, right? If Italy wins, Team USA gets through. They're second in the group. They're through. Easy, fully easy to understand. Not complicated at all. Everyone gets that. If Mexico wins, of course, all 3 teams would then be 3-1. Only 2 get to advance. The first tiebreaker is head-to-head record. Doesn't matter because each team will be 1-1 head-to-head. And then the second tiebreaker is the lowest quotient of fewest runs allowed divided by the number of defensive outs recorded in the games in that round between the teams tied. Basically, the fewest runs per out in the head-to-head games, which already, as I'm reading that, everyone's just like glazing over. If you're behind the wheel, hopefully you're still focused on the road. Like that's my main concern here. Like, do not let the tiebreaker language cause accidents on the road. That would be the absolute worst. So for Team USA to advance, it needs one of 2 things to happen. Italy wins, great. Score doesn't matter if that happens. Or Team Mexico wins a high-scoring game while allowing or scoring at least 5 runs. So, that's what we're looking for if we're trying to see the paths through for Team USA. So yeah, a little hubris there. Maybe a lot of hubris, actually, to put it more accurately. And I mean, I think it's interesting that DeRosa was the choice for the job, if only because we have plenty of experienced managers that are not managing major league teams. It was surprising in 2023, given that he's a TV host. He's good on TV. I think he does a good job on the show. I think when they made the choice, I was like, I wonder why. I didn't see any explanation. No one came out and said, we think DeRosa's perfect for the job because of X, Y, and Z. At least if they did, I didn't see it or hear it. I imagine if you had someone whose job was focused on managing baseball full time, more likely than not, they would have been more familiar with the scenarios. But it's not just like a one-man operation there either. He's going to wear it because of his comments, and understandably so. But this is like a systemic failure here. This is more than one person that probably deserves blame here, Jed.
To be fair, does a manager with more major league experience or professional experience come in and understand the rules of the World Baseball Classic better? Who knows? And to your point, DVR, like this is a group. They have management. They have other coaches that are there that to your point, systemically did not understand the rules of the tournament and what a tiebreak scenario looked like. So it's hopefully it doesn't come back to bite them. It's a fun team to watch in terms of talent. They showed a little bit of emotion in this game. I think just as a comeback potential. Once they kind of woke up and realized that they needed to, and they had some big moments. PCA came through huge, and I mean Gunnar got it going with the homer. And you could see there was some emotion there. The first few games Team USA played, it was, all business, which I get, but this tournament seems to mean a lot more to some other clubs. That's at least the outward appearance of it. So hopefully they get an opportunity to play another game.
Yeah, and let's not look past how cool these other teams are. I do want to say real quickly that among managers, I think there are different groups. There's a differentiator there when it comes to rules knowing. I think that some managers emphasize other parts of the game and maybe have bench coaches that they rely on to know all the rules. But I think of I think of Bruce Bochy. Against Don Mattingly, they were coaching against each other in a game. I've talked about this a couple times, but Bruce Bochy noticed that Don Mattingly, he said something to the pitcher and he turned around. He forgot to say something and he turned around and touched the mound by accident, or he turned around as he's leaving. And Mattingly was like, Bochy jumped out and was like, that was an extra mound visit. you got to take him off. You got to take him out. So they had to take their closer out of the game and replace him with, some reliever that wasn't even warm because it was the closer that this happened on. And I was like, that's Bochy being like, a rules hawk, and I think that there's some managers that are more rules hawks and some managers that are more room managers, like people that know personalities really well, and then there are some that are really media personalities. And I think that every manager has their own strengths. So DeRosa could still have his strengths. It could actually be he could have a good strength as a media person. He just messed this one up, right? And he could have a strength as a manager of personalities, because I do think people like him, and that maybe rules just wasn't necessarily the biggest emphasis for him when he attacked this as an opportunity. And maybe he thought, I know the rules of the game generally, but every tournament has its own rules. I just wanted to be a little bit fair to him, because I do think that there are different facets of managing and he could still be good at some of the other ones. And lastly, I don't want to like make this sound like America messed it all up. Italy also did well. I mean, like they have to be seen as the favorite, I think, tonight against Mexico. I mean, this is exactly why I liked Italy as a dark horse. Is they have a good lineup. They're good all the way through, even as they lose maybe Kyle Teal to a hamstring injury, and replace him with the bullpen catcher, who is a 20-year-old who plays in Italy professionally. I love that part of the story, but that's not why they're the favorites tonight. They're the favorites tonight because they're trotting out Aaron Nola to the mound tonight, and Mexico's got TBD, who's pitching. So this is what I thought, was the dream scenario for Italy, was, slug your way to some wins and then put Aaron Nola on the mound in a big game. I don't know if they get Aaron Nola for another game. I would certainly think that they hope so. But they had so far what I was hoping for them, which is a good lineup and just enough pitching. We'll see what happens tonight in the big game.
I think the pronunciation guide says Te Be De for the TBD pitcher. Just wanna
leave it to me to get that one wrong.
But I mean, I think there's a lot of things to think about here. Yes, Team Italy played really well. Kyle Teal homered. Sam Antonacci homered. Jack Caglione hit a moonshot.
Jack Caglione, we love on this show, but I looked up Antonacci a little bit, and like he's a hit over field and power. I mean, he's like a all hit tool, likely second baseman for the White Sox, but playing good enough shortstop for now, and he hit the homer, so like there's some power in there.
This is amazing. The top 5 hitters in the lineup for Italy didn't have a hit. Jacob Marcy, John Birdie, Vinny Pasquantino, Dominic Canzone, Zach DeZenzo, no hits. They had 2 walks across the group. They actually struck out a combined 10 times, and they still won. They had an 8-0 lead going to the bottom of the 6th inning.
There was concern that like the 10-run rule coming into play.
Yeah,
there was. I mean, that was not out of the question for at least an inning.
Yeah. So I mean, there's 100 more things we could poke at here. I think one other thing that caught my eye is something that Eno talked about previously. We've discussed Nolan McLean as someone who put together a phenomenal season last year, leapfrogged some other prospects in the Mets organization. He had the ball for Team USA, gave up a couple of homers, really struggled with the lefties. And that has been kind of I think maybe the last big question as we look at Nolan McLean and say, what's it going to take for him to make that move to become a big league ace eventually? Solving lefties was something Eno has flagged from what we saw of McLean last year as the big hurdle.
Yeah, I mean, last year he walked twice as many lefties as righties, and I just thought he looked, uncomfortable compared to how dominant he looked against righties. So it's definitely a question with a kind of a sweeper sinker as his core. He needs to push the four seam as far as it can go, push the changeup, and have some other weapons against lefties. And he did struggle there a little bit, and it was a big game. But I still think he's a good pick for in fantasy leagues. And I think he's going to be a good pitcher this year. But that's the big Achilles heel for him. And let's not forget the other games. What another fun thing that's happening today is that Canada and Cuba are playing, and the winner is in, and the loser is out. And Quantrill is pitching that one for Canada. That's fun. And then the Dominican Republic against Venezuela. It doesn't have huge ramifications, but one comes through as the 1 and one comes through as the 2. Plus, there's a lot of pride on the line. Plus, these are really good teams, so that's going to be a really good game. So that it's going to be a 3-screen night in the household here.
Yeah, at least Canada-Cuba is a matinee, but yeah, you've got Italy, Mexico, and the Dominican Republic, Venezuela both running this evening. 7 Eastern for Italy, Mexico, 8 Eastern for the Dominican Republic, Venezuela game. I believe we have Sandy Alcantara and Eduardo Rodriguez as the pitching matchup in that one. So looking forward to seeing how that one plays out. I think if we find out over the next 12 hours or so that Team USA has been eliminated, the full autopsy of the decision-making will occur at the necessary time. Let's move on to some other news, though. It's a lot going on. Hunter Greene is going to miss 14 to 16 weeks, like the timetable, because it's got a little precision to it, following surgery for the removal of bone fragments. Don't like the reason. Just think the timetable precision is good. Estimated return that would be July for this. And generally, I think, given the alternatives, as Nick Krall said, it's probably good news compared to a more severe injury like a Tommy John situation. So the Hunter Greene story is interesting because he had a PRP injection back in October, and he felt good leading up to spring training, but then felt something about a week before reporting while throwing a slider. Ended up getting a couple of opinions, and both Dr. Timothy Kremchek and Dr. Neil Elatrosh agreed that arthroscopic surgery to remove those bone fragments was the best option. Greene put out a long statement kind of expressing his disappointment in the situation. People are having some kind of odd reactions to that, but we'll just push that aside for the moment. First question here is, who steps in, right? I mean, who do you think actually fills an important spot? Obviously, everybody moves up a chair, so it puts a little more pressure on each member of that Reds rotation. You mentioned before the idea that Chase Burns wasn't a lock for the Reds rotation to start the year, even with Greene was healthy, seemed kind of strange. So if nothing else, this would probably assure us that Chase Burns is part of the rotation to begin the season. But who's actually moving up the depth chart and into a starting role for this Reds team with Greene out for the first half or so of the season?
Yeah, in terms of innings pitched, too, Chase Burns is second on the team. So, he seems to be in a progression that suggests that he'll be in the major league rotation. Number 1 on this team is Rhett Lauder. He has 8 2/3 innings with 11 strikeouts and has looked really good. Brandon Williamson has 7 innings with 9 strikeouts and has also looked pretty good. I got the impression, and it's not necessarily from anything really obvious, but it was just sort of like where the lockers are and like who was talking to whom, like it wasn't like I heard someone say, "Oh, Rhett Lauder's our guy," but my vibe was Rhett Lauder's in. Brandon Williamson has options. Rhett Lauder has options. Rhett Lauder is coming off a really big oblique injury. It's an interesting question as to like how many innings could he pitch this year, because he pitched so few last year, but it wasn't due to like a Tommy John surgery and arm thing. It was due to a core problem. I just have to I'll point at last to just the fact that, this is a long-term absence. Rhett Lauder, I think, has a little bit more upside. He's 24 years old. They make internal comparisons between Rhett Lauder and Brady Singer. They think that there's a lot in common between those guys. Even Rhett Lauder, when I asked him, he said, yes, I'm like the Brady Singer, because I was asking them about each other. So I just think it makes sense. He has a nice wide arsenal with good command. Should have weapons against both sides. I think Rhett Lauder's the guy, but I will acknowledge that this one's pretty close to 50-50.
Yeah, I mean, especially with those 3 guys, Burns, Lauder, and Williamson, with options, it gives the Reds the opportunity to see who performs best, quite frankly. And like even in a major league setting, spring training is nice. You can gather some information and make the best decision. But then when those lights turn on, there's some other data that will be collected and decisions will be made based on actual major league performance.
Fortunately, it's not something worse, as they were saying up top, though, with Hunter Greene. Comes back in the second half and looks like himself again, then that's a huge lift for them midseason as a team that wants to try and get back into the playoffs. I do think the Rhett Lauder call makes a lot of sense to me. Like I think there was a point, maybe even like a year and a half ago now, where he was actually still in the minors, and you could see some forecasts pointing to him being their best starter in the big leagues. I think there's more ceiling there than people realize, and Hunter Greene's been great. Chase Burns looks ridiculous. So even the possibility of Lauder being that good is really exciting if you're a Reds fan, even if that opportunity comes quicker with some bad news attached to it.
They're also like aware of what each player is like working on and doing in the spring. So like the fact that Chase Burns has a high walk rate right now, I bet you they're not that internally concerned with it, because right now Burns is throwing the changeup twice as much as he did during this regular season last year. He's also throwing a sinker more than he threw last year. So who knows if those make it all the way to the regular season. In the regular season, like Chase, what I talked about with Chase Burns was like, yeah, I got up to the big leagues and I wanted to make sure that I belonged and that I stayed. So I really focused on the four seam and the slider. Now, in the spring, he was talking about, I want to feel this kick change better. I want to be able to have better feel for it and command. So he's throwing it more. There's an open question as to what this arsenal looks like on opening day. And I think the team knows that he's working on these pitches. And so, if you want to say, oh, well, this walk rate by Burns is problematic and that's why they'll send him down, I would suggest that like they know that he's throwing these other pitches more, and I don't think that that'll be the reason he gets sent down.
Which is why you hear, and everybody just assumes it's just a throwaway comment that I'm working on this or I'm working on that in spring training. I don't really care about the results. There's a lot of truth to that, especially when you have a player who got a taste of the big leagues. He pitched, he showed some electric stuff, didn't pitch all that well. And so this is kind of the evolution of a young player, where you're really learning who you are and what pitches you're comfortable with. And the only way to do that is take spring training when it matters, but it doesn't matter as much, to try to get more comfortable with certain pitches or with hitters. If you're working on a certain approach, you have that window to really work on something. So I'm a big believer that spring training is the time to work on things, and you're especially if you're on the same page with the club, right? Like if the club wants you to do this, like if you're just going out there and doing things that the club doesn't agree with and you're not getting results, that could end up being a problem.
All right. And I don't think that's what's happening here, but you're right to call out those differences, and making sure everybody's on the same page is really important to understanding the context of these results as well. Like if you're not aligned in what you're supposed to be working on, that is a big, big problem for an organization. I was looking at the projections, the Reds rotation, obviously a strength. And even with Greene's projection being lowered to about 80 innings, it is 83 based on the Fangraphs depth chart. Seems reasonable if you're tracking towards a July return. Maybe it comes in a little lighter than that, depending on how rehab and ramp up eventually goes. It's still a rotation that by WAR projects to be 12th best in the big leagues. It's two teams ahead of them, Braves and Yankees, two behind them, Royals and Mets. So the pitching depth is probably a little bit underrated in terms of what the Reds have at their disposal. So I think it's more difficult to get to the postseason without Hunter Greene for a half season, but maybe not as damaging as you'd think based on the quality they've been able to put together. It's going to put some interesting stress on a bullpen that I always seem to have a lot of questions about, though. That's where I'm going to say, hey, do they have enough quality in those situations to get through? Because that could be their big vulnerability. Let's talk about this Jesus Luzardo extension. He gets a new deal with the Phillies. 5 years, $135 million. It also includes a club option for 2032, which I will confirm is going to be a real year. It's every time you say 2032, people are like, really? We're like, yeah, it's coming. So it kind of boils back to maybe a decision they had to make. I mean, Ranger Suarez left as a free agent this offseason, got 5 years and $130 million from the Red Sox this winter. Significant age gap between those guys, and considering that you already had Luzardo under contract for 2026, this is a 5-year extension, you're going to have him for 1 year more. It's not a perfect apples to apples sort of comparison, but I'm curious, Jed, as you're trying to keep things balanced in the long run, right? You have an aging core, but one which the window is still, I think, very open. Talked about this with Matt Gelb. They got a few impact position player prospects coming through. They're going to try and get a lot out of Andrew Painter in the back of that rotation this year. Do you think the Phillies ultimately made the right choice? In a situation where you obviously can't keep everybody, were they right to let Ranger walk and take those resources and extend Luzardo instead?
I think so. To your point, you got a guy in Luzardo who's a couple years younger, has fewer innings pitched and fewer games than Ranger. The health of Luzardo has come into question in the past. He's had two years where he's made 32 starts in his career, last year being one of them. But I think to your point, like Ranger getting 5 for 130, and you've got Painter, who's still only 22, but a guy that they have kind of been waiting for. I think the decision really was like, is it like Ranger was amazing for us? We love Ranger Suarez. We don't want to see him go, but we also have, we're already our payroll is already over the luxury tax threshold. And we've got this kid, Andrew Painter, who we've been waiting on for a few years now. Now is the time, right? We've got Sanchez, we've got Luzardo, we've got Nola, we've got Wheeler coming back. We have Walker to kind of fill that, and then we've got Painter. So to me, the question wasn't Luzardo versus Ranger; it was Ranger versus Painter, and the difference between a minimum guy and a guy that's going to be sign $130 million deal.
I think it's also to some extent a bet of stuff over command. I mean, if you just look at Luzardo in the revised model, he had a 105 stuff plus last year. He has a 106 in spring. And you compare that to somebody like Ranger, who has a 98 stuff plus this spring and has had, stuff in the 90s. He's got more of a command first package, and I wonder if there's just different opinions about how that ages when it comes to Boston and Philadelphia. I'm not sure that the Phillies made the right decision here, and one of the reasons is, and that might be surprising because I'm normally a stuffist, at least when it comes to year stuff, but I do wonder about aging, and I look at this injury history for Luzardo. I look at the fact that despite having these high stuff numbers, he's had low location numbers. I would look at the fact that, only once in his career has he thrown 100 innings with lower than a 3.5 ERA. He's a 4.2 ERA for his career. And once the numbers get real big on a career, the ERA becomes more meaningful. And then lastly, I just see like a real sort of volatility to his career. And so if you look at this chart right here, it looks at something as simple as Jesus Luzardo's velocity, fastball velocity over time. I'm just surprised at how much this jumps around. I mean, in 2019, it was, plus velocity, 96.7, and then in 2020, he's down a full tick and a half almost. And then he kind of, gets his way back to 2023. And then 2024, he drops to barely above 95. And then 2025, he's back up over 96. And it just seems like super volatile. And I've broken down that the ERA in the seasons where he averages over 96 is pretty pristine. And when he's under that, it's like a 4.5 ERA. So I feel like with the kind of shape that he has on his fastball, this is kind of volatile stuff. Versus a Ranger who, Ranger managed to keep a near average stuff plus despite his velo dropping to like 90 last year. Like he has good shapes on his stuff. He just doesn't have good velo. And I think that maybe Boston looked at that and said, that's going to age well. I think that's going to age well because it's not velocity dependent. I think Luzardo is pretty velocity dependent. So I don't know. I see a lot of volatility here, and I'm nervous. I'm made nervous by this deal.
I see two different kinds of volatility, though, because I think in case of Ranger Suarez, I mean, it's a longer-term trend of that velo dipping, and some of the fluctuations we saw in 2025 got to the point where you're saying, how usable is that fastball? If he's 89, 90 right now, where is he going to be 3, 4, 5 years from now? I know the command's good and the arsenal's deep, but it's going to be a very different approach for him if he keeps losing velocity, whereas with Luzardo, maybe we're seeing a little more of that evolution in how he pitches over these last couple of seasons. I think we started to see it at the end of his time in Miami. I don't think it's a brand new sort of thing. We know he had that bout with pitch tipping last year, bloated up the ratios for a 3-start stretch, and then got it back on track. He was 7th in the NL Cy Young Award voting. I know we're not looking that far down ballot very often in hindsight, but the health risk here is close to even for me. And I think some of the performance struggles we've seen from Luzardo, especially in 2024 with the Marlins, was 100% pitching at less than being healthy. Like that to me is the easy explanation, because if you look at the strikeout rates year over year between 2022 and 2025, 30%, 28.1%, down to 21.2 that last year in Miami, only 66 and 2/3 innings, back up to 28.5. That's a pretty consistently good ability to miss bats. And with Luzardo starting at that higher velocity band, he's going to lose a little over time too. But if he's throwing 93, 94 in years 3, 4, and 5 of that deal, there's still enough there for him to fall back on. So I think the command question is probably the most fascinating one here. Like, how well is Luzardo going to command the ball? Historically, that's been more inconsistent. And if he can do that, then this ends up being just fine for Philly.
Well, I look at, to the inconsistency too. You go back and you look at Luzardo's arm angles. I mean, he was in 21 and 22, 36 degrees, 23, 35, 24, up to 39. And then last year down to 32. So, there could be an argument made too that, he's getting a lot of outside influence, trying to figure out, and when I say like coaches trying to like figure out where the right arm angle for him to be the most effective. And so, I would be looking at, what he did last year outside of those 3 starts that, where he was tipping pitches, that it looked like that lower arm slot is one that is better for him. It adds a little bit more lateral break to the pitch. Savant had him adding a sweeper last year. I'm not sure I buy that that's any different than his slider. I think it's just a lower arm angle that induced more lateral break and registered as a sweeper. But if he can keep that, especially the lefties, if he can keep that, that sweeper moving laterally and then keep it down against righties, the stuff is great. And once again, I don't think that I think that if the Phillies had their way, they're keeping both of these guys. But I think given the fact that Ranger was a free agent and Luzardo was not, they had control over the situation with Luzardo. They have the exclusive rights to sign him to an extension. And so Ranger earned the right to go into free agency and maximize his value. And that's exactly what he did. And so I don't think this is a decision Philly made with, and I didn't read any reports if they offered him a contract and what that was. But I once again, I don't think this is Philly saying, Ranger, we don't like you. I think this is, the Phillies saying, we have Luzardo under contract and we want to make sure that we have at least a couple starters, quality starters moving forward under contract.
There seems to be no upper bound on the Phillies payroll, but there also is. I mean, the last year, they're past all the luxury tax thresholds, so you can't say like, oh, this is a luxury tax thing. But they settled in last year at 314 with their luxury tax number, and this year, right now, it's 318. So they don't seem to, want to get into that 400 million territory. They seem like 300 is the number. And so I think that's right. I think they're running into some payroll issues after the Schwarber thing, after the Schwarber extension, and they had to do some creative accounting. Now, they still have some big contracts on their books that make this difficult. You know, with Schwarber at $30 million a year starting 2027, Trey Turner at 27 going into 2032, Bryce Harper at 27 million going into 2031. It drops down a little bit at the back end. Aaron Nola at 25 million going into 2030, and now Jesus Luzardo, 11 million this year, but 27 million every year after until 2031. That's an expensive core. You know, we were, talking about how the Padres get, painted into a corner with some of their deals. And, you wonder what this is going to do in the future for the Phillies. Now, they do have some money coming off with Taijuan Walker, 18 million coming off. Adolis Garcia is on a $10 million 1-year deal, and Jose Alvarado comes off at 9. Alec Boehm is making 10 this year and he's off. And Sosa is making 4 this year and he's off. But I just listed their starting third baseman, a huge reliever for them, a starting right fielder, and a depth starter. So, is that going to be much cheaper than the money they're having off the books? They don't have that much flexibility, is what I'm saying, even if it feels like they can spend forever.
I mean, I saw the number for Luzardo. He goes from 11 million this year to 27 million next year. It's a $16 million bump. Taijuan Walker's making 18 this year, so most of the raise that Luzardo's getting is just coming from Taijuan Walker falling off the books. And I think what's going to happen
done in other places too. Kyle Schwarber is making 18 this year and goes to 33 next year, so they're already pretty spent up for next year too.
Yeah, Keller gets a little bit of a raise. I think what's going to be interesting is to see how well guys like Justin Crawford, and Aiden Miller eventually adapt, because I think it's going to be increasingly important with this aging roster to get league minimum players inexpensive players to supplement the roster, but also contribute at high levels, because you're fighting against aging in the case of look, it's a good core. Like, I think if you said, give me some position players you think are generally going to age well, for different reasons, I think we'd have Schwarber and Trey Turner and maybe Bryce Harper on that list too. Like, I think when I look at that group, I'm like, yeah, if anyone's going to still be good at 34, 35, 36 years old, like, that trio is a pretty good group to bet on. But you're right to call out some of the similarities between the Phillies and the Padres, where eventually the way they're building the roster is going to lead to a problem. And it's not a problem if they win a title. They win a title, you're just like, hey, we won. We're going to take our medicine. We might have a couple of tough years when we're at the end of these deals and we're a little hamstrung. That's fine. I think that's a trade-off that most franchises are happy to make, but it gets more complicated if you don't bring it home, if you don't get that title.
And there are, a lot of years left on these contracts, like I just pointed out. So, what is lost in this is that, we're still in the years where Harper could have a big year, even though we're saying, that he's not elite anymore. And there's, we'll get into this in a second in terms of some of the red flags maybe on his resume. There, people still have these bounce back years in their early 30s. Trey Turner has the athleticism to be useful all the way through. And we've said that we love Kyle Schwarber's bat speed, and that maybe, he can be just a hitter and just be a really good hitter for a long time. So I do think that, like, in any given year over the next, 2-3 years, there's still a chance they could win it all. I was just thinking about that as like a possible bold prediction this year. It's like, it would feel pretty bold for me to say the Phillies win it all this year, but it's the type of team that still has the talent where if everybody, comes to the table at the right time, they can still win it all. But it becomes increasingly unlikely. And I think that, 2028 and 2029, maybe the beginning of some difficult years.
To your point, Trey Turner, he's on the books for 27 million through 2033, his 40-year-old season, and you got a 23-year-old Aiden Miller sitting in AAA. Does he come up and play second base, third base? I don't know what his versatility is. I gotta imagine that they'll have to have a hard decision to make on either Bryson Stott or Alec Boehm here. soon. But Trey Turner doesn't seem like he's going anywhere. So how do you plug in Aiden Miller on that? The pitching staff, to your point, I mean, you got Wheeler coming back, you got Sanchez, Luzardo, Nola, and Painter, and then the never ending debate about the Phillies bullpen. Right, like, my God, it just, this is one of those situations where they feel snake bitten in the bullpen, but the names that they have going into the year in Duran, Alvarado, Keller, and Kerkering, I mean, anybody would be happy with those four guys taking the bulk of your innings out of the bullpen.
Yeah, so to give you some context here for anyone who's like, how good is the Phillies bullpen? Fourth by WAR. Padres, Dodgers, Rays, Phillies, and then a little bit of a drop before you get to like Brewers, Red Sox, Astros, Yankees, right? That's the top 8 right now just based on straight up projections. We talk about bullpen depth, we talk about A bullpen, B bullpen. The Phillies have done a great job of bolstering that. That was a laughable weakness 4 or 5 years ago. It is an absolute strength now. I think that works really well with that aging staff, with the questions around how effective Painter's going to be, trying to get through the first few weeks of the season, maybe without Zach Wheeler. But the other part of this, too, by the way, and I think it came up kind of in comments here, Christopher Sanchez is on just a ridiculous team-friendly extension right now. I mean, he was pre-arb before he signed it, I think, but he's $3.5 million this year, $6.5 million in 27, $9.5 million in 2028, club options in 29 and 30 at 14 and 15 million. And that's a guy that's pitching like a top 5, top 10 pitcher in the game right now. So you hit on a few things like that. It affords you some cushion with some of that long-term aging, some of those big money players. The Bryce Harper elite or not thing, I know there was the back and forth he was having he was wearing the shirt after Dave Dombrowski's comments. And look, this feels to me a lot like the is he an ace sort of debate that always comes up every single year. And people are like, what is an ace really? And it's just like, it's a conversation we've had so many times. I don't know, by WRC Plus, Bryce Harper was tied for 25th last year out of 145 qualified players. If it's not elite, it's really close to it. And he's had some injuries in recent years. He's taken to first base pretty well. Like overall, if he's not elite, he's still really good. And if he's still really good, he's worth the contract for these next several years. We're digging into some things about dollars per WAR. Ben Clemens wrote a story about what teams are paying in free agency for a win now. Shocker, it's going up. But I think there's something that ties a lot of this together. Jed was talking about the decisions they're going to have to make on Alec Boehm and Bryson Stott. To me, those are guys that are gone when they hit free agency. You don't retain players like that. They're good players. They're pieces on teams that contend and win titles, but they're not guys that you extend for 3 and 4 years into the future and pay full free agent market value to do it, right? That's just not how teams operate. And I think the Phillies are going to get both of those calls right. I would say there's a better chance they'd keep Stott around than Boehm, but I just don't think the pieces are going to align where they do that. But is there something we're missing in how we think about these long-term deals? And a lot of times you'll see people say, it's underwater, it's no good. We've said that on the show about a few different contracts over the years. People are making the argument that Rafael Devers' contract is underwater already. I don't think it's quite there, but what are you seeing based on how teams are acting in free agency, and how should we be thinking about these big deals that are still several years away from expiring for some very good players?
Yeah, I mean, this is all colored by the fact that these deals were signed a little while back in a lot of cases, and you're looking at the back end, which are always supposed to look a little bit worse than the front end. This is how these contracts are built up. But it also depends on your context in a lot of other ways. So this is the basic way of investigating value. And what we can see is Ben Clemens has taken projected free agent value and compare that to their contracts that they've gotten in this past offseason, and shown that basically the price of a win above replacement in free agency is $11.2 million. Now, if you follow that same deal with Bryce Harper and you look at what he's got left and you say, okay, he's projected to be about a 3.5 win player this year, which is just short of an all-star. All-star is around four wins. And he's in his 30s. and you age him a half win per season, you say he's going to put up another 13 and a half wins over the rest of his career. And then you say, well, he's also going to be paid $153 million over the rest of his career. And so the Phillies are paying him $11.3 million per win over the rest of his career. And you say, well, if free agency is 11.2, and what Ben Clemens also found is that players that are worth more than 2 WAR usually get about $12.8 per win above replacement. Then you'd say this contract is not underwater at all. That is one way of looking into it. Now, your numbers could be different. If you look at the ZiPS projections, Dan Szymborski has ZiPS projections for Bryce Harper, and you'd say, well, this doesn't look as exciting. I don't like this at all. He has 3-year ZiPS projections, and he says that in year 1 of this 2026, he's only going to be worth 3.1 wins, and then the aging is going to be tougher. And what ZiPS does is it looks at other players like Harper in the past. It has a sort of a comp machine, and it says this is how they've aged in the past. And so it says in year 2, he's already a 2.2 win player. He's dropping more than half a win. If you do it that way, you're going to say this contract is underwater. There's another way to say this contract is underwater, which is you could say, well, no one would give Bryce Harper right now at 33 years old, a 6-year, $153 million contract if he was on the free agent market. But are you sure about that? Because if you put him up against Pete Alonso, who did get a $155 million 5-year deal this offseason, last year, Pete Alonso was worth 3.6 wins, and Bryce Harper was worth 3.5 wins. Where Bryce Harper was a little bit worse at the plate, he was a much better defender at first, and these things do matter. So is he that far off of Pete Alonso? I do get it, though. 33 is the big number that everyone's looking at. So I think that when people say, is he elite or not, they're not only kind of looking at what he's doing this year, they're kind of in their head doing the aging process, and they're kind of saying, like, oh, if I call him elite now, then how stupid is that going to look next year? So like they're kind of doing the forecasting that we're talking about. I think, when you talk about semantics of the word elite, I think the semantics of the word now is pretty interesting. It's like, what do you mean by now? Do you mean like we look up at the end of the year and Bryce Harper's put up 3.5 wins? Or do you mean the next 3 years? So I think a lot of this will come down to how he ages. And I also personally, I would just say that I'm not sure that the comp machine is the best way to look at aging for players, because what you're going to do is you're going to look at players in the 70s. And you're going to look at some slugger in the 70s who plays first base and walks 12% of the time and strikes out 21% of the time, whatever it is. And I don't think that's necessarily a fair comp for somebody who's working on his body the way that Harper does, working on his swing every offseason. And then lastly, Jed, you brought up something. What about travel ball and like the fact that Bryce Harper is the LeBron James of baseball, where like we've been watching him since he was like 9? Like how much do those years wear on those legs? Do you think that there's something there to like, this is a dude who's been playing year round his whole life?
There's certainly something there. I think you're right to call out, previous generations. We talked, I think, last week about spring training and how, spring training was used to get into shape back in the day. And I think that I think guys are more conscious of fitness now with the more strict testing around PEDs, including amphetamines. I think guys have to be more conscious. The expectation of output has gone up. But I do wonder how much the overall body of work does age on these guys. And I think Bryce is kind of the tip of the spear on this in terms of, kids being under the spotlight early in their lives, playing more in high stress environments, where, I like anecdotally, I can tell you, like, I didn't do many of the showcases. It wasn't as big a part of the ecosystem. but I also like I wasn't that like highlighted in terms of my prospect or my projectability. So there's probably some element of like I wasn't as I wasn't as exciting as Bryce Harper as a young player. But that being said, I did play travel ball. I played summer ball, but it was under far less scrutiny. The level of competition probably wasn't as high. And so, the wear and tear on my body, I think the reason that I was able to play as long as I did is I probably didn't have as many high stress reps, as early as some of these younger guys did. So I do question, how long these bodies are going to hold up and whether guys are going to play into their late 30s and still be effective.
I would say there's another factor here too. Just Harper in particular has what I would describe as a violent swing. I enjoy watching his swing. I saw that breakdown a few years ago. I think it was the Washington Post did a really good visual breakdown of Harper's swing, and I've always liked watching him hit. But it's sort of like the pitcher that throws hard with really violent mechanics, where you say, hey, that's working, that's great, that's electric stuff. What's the long-term consequence of that? I think that's a reasonable question to ask. And I know people are saying, oh, Bryce Harper's bat's slowing down. Bat speed last year, 81st percentile. I mean, it's not in any way problematic. It was 81st percentile in 2024 as well. So I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure he's aging as poorly as some people want to believe. But all that is to say, yes, his timeline for competitive ball started about as early as it can. And there's probably a cost that will be paid eventually for that.
From a physical standpoint, clearly not from a financial standpoint, right? Like,
right.
that is, that's clearly worked out. But, you could also look at the other side of that coin and say, he played with a lot of kids that were doing the same thing he did, who probably didn't even get drafted, maybe not even played college ball.
Yeah. And, there's some numbers out there that suggest that he's gotten way worse against the fastball, and that's going to be problematic. But I would point out to those numbers that, again, there's some context here. So he used to get 35-40% four-seamers, and he used to feast on them. He used to absolutely obliterate them, and he would always lead the league in numbers against the fastball. So you're coming off a peak number there. And then secondly, now he gets, like last year, he got 28% four-seam fastballs. That's because of the league and because the league trends away from the fastball, but also because of, him obliterating fastballs. And so, last year he got 26% sliders, the most of his career. So now he's gotten to the point, and this spring he's getting 35% sliders versus 25% four-seamers. So if you're Bryce Harper, the hitter, you could sit slider just as well as you could sit fastball at this point. You're getting them just about as evenly. And I don't have the numbers in front of me to suggest that I know that he's sitting slider, but I will point out that last year was one of the best years he's ever had on the slider. It was like the third best year he's ever had by pitch stat values on the slider. So yeah, he shifted some of his attention maybe to the slider. Maybe he's picking his spots more and sitting slider not all the time, but in certain counts in certain places. And maybe that makes him vulnerable against the fastball. And that will make his bat look slower. You'll watch and you'll think, oh, he was really slow on that one. Well, maybe he thought it was a slider and he took the slider swing and oops, it was a fastball. So there's a lot of context that goes into these. I would say I'm not that nervous about a guy who has an 80th percentile bat speed, who was in the top 25 at WRC Plus last year, who still strikes out 20% of the time, less than league average, still walks a lot. Like, I'm actually not that worried about Bryce Harper. I don't know. Like, I'm really kind of surprised that there's all this sort of agita about him. Like, the only thing that bothers me is that his swing strike rate popped a little bit. I do think in future years the strikeout rate will go up, but it's at a good spot right now. It can go up year over year, a couple years in a row, and not get to average. So I think Bryce Harper is a fine pick in fantasy leagues. I think he's going to have a good year, and I think this is too much too early.
Also, there's one other factor here. I know we've talked about Bryce Harper chasing more, really over like the last 4 seasons. Part of the reason Robert Orr developed his SEAGER metric, like an overall approach of swing, like, are you hitting the pitches you should hit? Are you swinging at the pitches you should hit? Is because it's not just about chase. I think you're right. I think Harper's had to make adjustments to the way the league pitches him in order to do the kinds of damage he wants to do. By Seager still making really good swing decisions. I was just looking at the last 5 years. 100 percentile in Seager back in 2021, 82nd percentile in 22, 99th percentile in 23, 86th percentile in 24, and 94th percentile in 2025.
Yeah, and if we don't have Seager in front of you, like, keep that zone swing, O swing in front of you. Remember, 40%. He's above 40% all 4 of those years. He's swinging at 82%, like 80 to 82% of the strikes he sees in the zone. Like, he knows the zone and he's aggressive in it. And I think that includes sliders.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern I would have would just be his body breaking down, like just injuries, wear and tear. Like, it's not going to be his ability to swing the bat fast enough to generate the power, or his swing decisions. Like, clearly those are elite skills. Those will
Obliques
age
and
really well.
hammies and
right, like
just things.
knees, like all that stuff. Like if ligaments and joints start breaking down on him, then that's going to cause him to fall off faster than typical aging curves of his skills. Like that's the big concern. The other guy that comes up in the same light, Rafael Devers. Like, it's ever since the trade last year, it just seems like a lot of people are saying Rafael Devers is going to be a disaster at the end of the contract, and that the Giants were wrong for trading for him, and Boston was right to get away from that deal when they did. I'm curious, Jed, what your longer-term view is of Rafael Devers, taking a lot of these factors into account with his profile.
I'm still a big fan of Rafi Devers. I think that he's a guy that has the ability to put the barrel on the ball as well as anybody I've seen in the game. And to put it simply, I'm a big Rafi fan. And we talked about this. Like, I think the Giants needed to make a move like this because it's really hard to get a hitter of his quality signed in San Francisco. And he obviously that situation in Boston, I don't know if toxic is too strong of a word, but he needed a change of scenery.
Yeah, it was clear that player and organization were no longer aligned on how things were going to work.
One difference that it comes to me about Harper and Devers, Joe, it's got to be fair to just bring up the body to some extent. Like, Harper, steals more bases. He's faster, so he's been more valuable on the base pass. Some of the smaller things that add up. And so then there's the defensive piece. I will say, though, it was his first attempt at first base, and he only had a -1 outs above average. And as bad as he looked the first game, I was there the first game he played first base for the Giants, and I was like, this is a disaster. That was just the first game. I should have given him more leeway because after that he looked fine. I think he may play. I think people will be surprised at how much more he plays than Bryce Eldridge at first base this year. He may just be the regular first baseman. If he ends up being average or slightly better than average with the glove at first base, that buys him 4 or 5 years. It's important when it comes to wins above replacement, helping the team out, all sorts of things. The ways that we consider how he aged, it will matter if he plays first base. So there's a little bit of a possibility there where if he doesn't play first base, he's just a DH, and the body gets worse. That we'll say, that's what Boston was worried about.
Yeah. And I think it's just a question of fitness, like how fit can Rafi keep himself as a first baseman DH now? He's still only 29. But yeah, he's never been known for sprint speed and doesn't get paid for that. But I do think that is a reflection of fitness level. And so I think it's a similar concern for me as Harper in terms of just, fitness and overall, like, can you keep the body going? So I guess as a 29-year-old versus 33 with Harper, to be having that conversation maybe piques my concern a little bit more, but like I said, I love the bat, and he's just such a dynamic hitter and does everything, right? He can drive the ball to every part of the ballpark, really hard to pitch to. You make a mistake and he's going to make you pay.
And this also goes back to kind of the Harper versus Alonso question of like, what are the actual decisions? Like, and it also kind of points to me like one thing that the Rockies did this offseason was they were like, hey, we're going to overpay, but we're going to overpay for like the 1 year guys. So we're going to give the $4 million pitcher an $8 million deal, and we'll do this. So I think the Giants, for a while under Farhan, were doing the like, hey, let's overpay for the 1 year deal. Let's give Michael Conforto 2 years when nobody else wants to give him 2 years. Let's do that. Let's give Willie Adames 150 when people, or whatever it was, and when people were, looking at giving him, $20 million less or whatever. So they had tried the kind of overpay route. And in this case, I think they said, we can try the overpay route as much as we will, and we may never get Aaron Judge to come. Like Aaron Judge is never walking through that door. So this is the closest we can do. And I think that's what people's general critique is of the dollars per war framework, is like, it sometimes doesn't remember these externalities of like, who's actually available, who can they actually sign, who will sign there, and things like that. So as much as I hated the Eric Hosmer deal in San Diego, to some extent, it was the presage for a lot of what came after, because he was a guy who took the money, went there, they had a little bit of success. It made it a little bit easier for Manny Machado to take the money and go there. It made it a little bit easier for every successive person. So sometimes there are things beyond.
San Diego itself doesn't hurt.
That's right.
I mean, look, if I was a free agent, I'd have my agent calling them like, but I can bring to the table, because I'd love to live there.
Pretty nice place to play baseball.
Yes, high up on the park rankings here on Rates and Barrels. I was looking at the SEAGER percentile numbers for Rafael Devers. Again, a guy that people say is aggressively hacking and guessing or taking his shots, however you want to describe it. His SEAGER percentile rankings over the last 5 years. 2021, 78th percentile. 2022, 81st. 2023, 96th percentile. 2024, back down to 81st. 2025 with Boston, 96th percentile. After the trade to San Francisco, 93rd percentile. I don't know, man. Like, I same as Harper. Like, I can see reasonable longer-term concerns, but I think we're maybe pushing them too close to the present right now as a result of other factors that have come into play.
What does now mean?
Yeah, what does now mean? Yeah, I don't think it's abnormal compared to other long-term deals in terms of how it's likely to age. And I will say that knowing it could always age poorly, but I got to put it out there anyway. So there you go. I'm sure people will weigh in on lots of parts of this conversation in the Discord. It's a great place to go if you want to talk about the games that are happening, spring games, WBC games, or otherwise. You want to talk fantasy strategy, you can join with the link in the show description. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.